excited to share them with you guys. So welcome, Lawrence Capella.
Thank you, David. That was really sweet. Hi, thanks for coming. I'm a historian, and for the last 5 years, I've been teaching a college course that I designed on the history of the right to privacy. And on the first day of the course, I always start things off with the same exercise. Before I hand out the syllabus or before I take attendance or anything like that, I tell the students to just unlock their phones, swap them with the person in the class whom they've never met before, and then just give that person 5 minutes of unfettered access. Phones, photos, emails, videos, everything's up for grabs. Obviously, none of them go for it. And at this point, they all just kind of freeze and the room starts to feel super awkward. And I just kind of sit there and don't say anything. I mean, they're college kids. They're not stupid, right? They know that they signed up for a class about privacy. And so every single year, without fail, there's one of the more vocal students will eventually speak up and boldly say that they're not going to hand over their phone because this is an invasion of their privacy. Now, the first student, this one that usually speaks up, this one of those like overachiever types, almost, you know what I'm talking about? Don't get me wrong, I'm all about the enthusiasm, but what becomes clear at this point is that they're expecting me to pay them some kind of compliment, right? That this was some thinly veiled ruse, and I'm gonna be like, good for you, you care more about your privacy than all of the average members of Generation Z. But I don't. What I do is I go hard in the other direction, and I kind of shine the light of the sun on it, and I'm like, dude, get over yourself. Do you really think a stranger cares that much about your life? I promise you're not nearly as interesting or edgy as you think you are. So stop being so self-obsessed, and just hand over your phone. But then right after that, and they're trying to see if I'm kidding, I immediately follow up with one of my absolute favorite sentences in the English lexicon, which is this beautiful combination of words that our government and corporations and our media have been saying to us for about the last 130 years. If you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to hide? This is a very slippery statement, right? When you see it, most of us at first glance know that it's predicated on a particular kind of bullshit. And when we encounter it, most of us feel deep down that something's wrong. But it's also kind of a rhetorical checkmate. If you ever study things like sophistry or the idea of how you can articulate certain sentences, it's almost like when you're younger and someone's like, hey, stop being so defensive. How do you there's no way to respond to that without coming across as defensive. And this is very much one of those slippery rhetorical checkmates. It's very problematic. It pops up for about the last 130 years of our history. And it's super hard, especially in the moment when your blood is up, to articulate a proper defense against. It inherently puts us on the defensive. It's difficult to find a workaround that's going to be both effective on a rhetorical but also intellectual level. So after I say this very problematic but also very effective sentence to the poor student who's now panicking and was only trying to impress me, I give the class a way out. What I say is, fine, you don't have to give your phones. Anyone can be excused if they want to be excused. All you have to do is explain to me in plain language why your privacy is important without resorting to cliches. You can't just be like, oh, it's my right, or it's nobody's business, or some abstraction like that. Clear, digestible language, explain to me, why is your privacy important? If you're not doing anything wrong, you should have nothing to hide. Are you just self-obsessed like everyone says Generation Z is? Or is there really something that's going on there? Who cares about your text messages really? Who cares about your purchase history? Now, of course, I'm not gonna ask anyone here to swap phones, but while we're all together, just if you can take 2 minutes to hi to the person next to you or someone that you haven't met before and see if you can work out a decent answer to this question. If you're not doing anything wrong, you should have nothing to hide. If I came up to you and showed you like an FBI badge and was like, I promise I'm not going to steal your money or rob your house, but I need your phone and I need your keys. If you're not doing anything wrong, you should have nothing to hide. Just take 2 minutes and I'm going to get a drink. Anyone? If you're not doing anything wrong, you should have nothing to hide.
Z mentioned that the reason you wouldn't want someone to have your phone even if you've done nothing wrong is what are they going to do? It's what they could just go send a message wherever and then it looks like you sent it. So
it's a very sinister mind you have there, Chris, but that's good. Okay. So you're right. All right, so just shut me. All right. So somebody might send a message to somebody and send it. Okay. Let's say you can't communicate. Let's just shut it off and say it's just about ingesting. But yeah, that was a good point, actually. It's that thing they say about all across bars in New York City, people are like, oh, let me give you my number, and then Venmoing themselves $200. You hear about that? Oh, if you didn't learn that trick and find yourself broke and can't make rent. Anyone? Yeah.
Something about giving you don't get to control the impression you make on somebody. So a lot of the time it's not really privacy, it's choose what you put out to people. So it's
Sure. If anyone didn't hear, he's saying that it has a lot to do with controlling the impressions that you're able to make on people, and that you're losing a certain amount of control with regard to that when you let people have that access.
I don't trust you not to misconstrue the things I'm doing that are not wrong, and I don't want to be put into have like young patients defending my actions.
Sure. Very good. That it would maybe inherently put you on the defensive. That's interesting. Anyone else?
I pretty much, my day hasn't started before I've done lots of wrong things based on many different viewpoints. So let's just start from the axiom that I am doing something wrong constantly.
Mickey out here living her best life. Okay. Look, obviously this is a complicated question with a number of complicated answers. And in the end, we're looking for something simple. And by the end of the talk, you're all doing really well. And you're the kind of people who go to lectures on Friday nights, so of course you're doing well. But in the end, we're looking for something simple. And by the end of the talk, I promise we'll kind of elaborate on some of this more eloquent but simple languages that we're looking for, something that's punchy. But one thing I've learned as a historian of the United States, and I'm a historian particularly of the 20th century, is that every generation of Americans does tend to have a certain epic social and political struggle that comes to define them. In the 30s and 40s, a lot of that has to do with the role of government, particularly with regards to labor rights in business and financial regulations. Does the government have the right to tell businesses what they can and can't do in a capitalist society? In the 50s and 60s, obviously civil rights, this notion of how to break down the power structures we built around race and things of that sort. In the 80s and 90s, for those of us who remember, the culture wars is a big thing that seems to have a new iteration now. I wholeheartedly believe that the privacy rights and the issues surrounding privacy is the next great social and political struggle. Climate change also a little bit important, but otherwise, these are things that I just think it's one of the key issues. And because of that, not being able to articulate what privacy is and why it's important is one of the main reasons that privacy keeps getting its ass kicked in the digital age. And so at the end, I want to go over some privacy basics, because the things that push up against privacy, national security, free media, corporate efficiency with data collection, all of these things, morality laws, they're easy to explain, right? Bombs going off. I'm trying to keep you safe, right? One-day shipping and the ability for a conglomerate to create a level of efficiency that we've never before seen in terms of consumerism, and a free media and a free press and the right to go in. These things are important, but they're also easy to kind of explain. You say it and people get it. But when you start saying, well, why is privacy important? It gets weird. You start sounding like you're giving a philosophy lecture. Immediately people are falling asleep. It doesn't work as well as the kind of rhetorical thrust that can really provide the kind of protections that we need. Usually we just kind of point at Orwell, right, and say something about 1984 and then kind of move along. And so it's important to understand some of the basics, and it's what I'm trying to do here and what I'm trying to do with the book. So what is privacy exactly? This is a tricky question. Privacy is kind of an umbrella term. It's one of those words that we use so broadly that it's hard to pin down. Kind of like the word freedom or love or liberty, the meaning is largely going to be dependent on the context. Now, the most influential American privacy scholar of the 19th century is a Supreme Court justice named Louis Brandeis. Show of hands, anyone ever heard of Brandeis? He's a titan in the court's history. He's one of those immortal characters. He has a lot to do with wiretapping later on in his life. Now, in 1890, before he's on the court, he just graduated from Harvard. He's a lawyer. He's crushing it in Massachusetts. And he defined privacy in this very, very famous Harvard Law Review as simply just the right to be let alone. And that was his notion of what he saw it as. Now, to be fair, this definition doesn't really work well. Brandeis is a lot smarter than I am, but on this one, I kind of have him. It's got a lot of punch, but you put it under a microscope, and that's way too broad of a definition for something that's so complicated. If you're walking down the street and someone starts screaming insults at you or throws a rock at you, that's not pleasant. But I don't think anyone would say that the issue there was a violation of your privacy. You would talk about it, in some other way, shape, or form. Brandeis is writing in the 19th century. Now, the most influential privacy scholar of the 20th century is a guy up at Columbia. He's a law professor named Alan Weston. Now, Westen says that privacy is, he calls it, quote, the claim of individuals, groups, or institutions to determine for themselves when, how, and to what extent information about them should be communicated to others. You can boil that down and just basically say the right to control the information that's out there about you, or exert some measure of control over the information that's out there about you. That's good. It's a lot tighter than Brandeis's definition, but it's also not perfect either. And the main flaw is because not all privacy has to do with information, right? Think about privacy, particularly with regards to the body, what you call bodily privacy, which is a sacred right in almost every civilization. It has nothing to do with information. Things like urination and defecation, sexual intercourse, masturbation, certain health conditions that can present externally. All of these things have social protections that we've built around them concerning privacy, and they have nothing to do with information. I don't know how many of you know this, but abortion rights in the eyes of the law, particularly at the constitutional level, is not an issue of a woman's right to choose. That's the social and political argument. But as far as the law is concerned, the big cases, Griswold versus Connecticut, Roe versus Wade, all of these things are built around right to privacy cases. That it doesn't have to do with right or wrong. What it has to do with, look, our national epic is one that's built in this notion of limited government. That's what the founding fathers talk about. That's what we teach our 9-year-olds when they're learning about the Constitution. And so the legal argument wasn't right or wrong. It was, do we live in a society where this is simply too far of a bridge for someone to go in? Now, still, bodily privacy aside, for the most part, this is a good definition, and it's a good jumping off point for a lecture like this, because Westen does get us a lot closer to where we want to go for the purposes of this talk. Especially because most of you, I think, are here to talk about things like big data and the privacy problems that we have in the internet age, a lot of which have to do with information. Again, what I'm trying to say, there are books and books and books written about how to define privacy. Just remember that it's not one single thing. It's what you call an umbrella term. It's a complicated assemblage of all the reasons that instinctively you would refuse to let the person next to you see your phone. Daniel Solov is a really famous privacy scholar. He calls it an umbrella term. Just like freedom, liberty, love, the word privacy talks about a multitude of different but also somewhat related things. Some of these things are distinct, but in most cases they overlap in very interesting ways. And so a really useful strategy when you're trying to make sense of privacy is to identify why it has value in the first place. Now I'm doing that thing that I said the problem was. I'm sounding like I'm giving a philosophy lecture at the time when I'm supposed to be pushing up against things that are easy. So let's talk about it in easy, clear, easy terms. Why is privacy important? Where do we find it? Now, for starters, it's important to understand that privacy is a natural impulse. I don't mean natural as in normal. What the hell is normal, right? I mean capital with like natural with a capital N, like naturalists, like Planet Earth. If you ever binge watch that stuff, like that kind of thing. Privacy is found throughout nature. Scientists have long seen that there's a desire for privacy that extends just beyond the human condition and into the larger animal kingdom. Naturalists and ecologists, they've all discovered that most animals, especially mammals seem very in tune with this, will carve out private spaces for themselves to engage in what they call periods of seclusion, either by themselves or what they call small group intimacy throughout their lives. There's a really famous naturalist named Robert Ardrey, who in the 70s was kind of like a major part of the conversation. He wrote a book, it was called The Territorial Imperative, and he talks a lot about this. Now, this makes sense if you think about it. If you're in nature, if you're an animal, predators around you, carving out a private space does give you a variety of benefits. First off, it allows you to learn survival skills. It also provides space for people for organisms to mate effectively in a certain level of privacy with security, and it also gives you a safe space to raise your young. And there's this other thing too, for reasons we don't really understand, a lot of mammals, I don't know if you ever heard about this, will seek out privacy in the moments before death. Has anyone ever heard of that? That mammals kind of go off on their own before they die. For some reason, it seems to be this thing that spans across different areas in the mammalian family. Now, in terms of people, you have favorite anthropologists, people like Margaret Mead, has also shown that virtually every civilization employs some kind of rules that govern privacy, regardless of social context, regardless of the ways that we've expressed ourselves and things like that. Anywhere you are in the world, regardless of how this thing kind of grew, your civilization grew, every civilization has some rules regarding privacy. Concealment of sexual activity overwhelmingly is a common thread that unites us as human beings. The idea of having sex in groups is really seen as something that's a very, very small kind of behavior that isn't really practiced in the overwhelming majority of human beings. Urination, defecation as well, and also in particularly female genitalia over male genitalia. The idea of covering these things and providing a certain amount of privacy that's then enforced through either laws or social practices. But enough about mammals and anthropologists. Modern civilization in the digital age. Why is privacy valuable now with the technical wondrous renaissance that we've all been so privileged to experience? So first and foremost, to what you were talking about, which is also kind of in the course description, information privacy gives us control of what we call our self-narrative. In my opinion, this is the most important thing about privacy if you're living in 2019. Having privacy gives you a measure of control over how you're perceived by others. And having control over what information people have about you and don't have about you is crucial if you want to live in a modern society. It's not like people have two piles of information. Think about the things you keep secret and the things you don't. It's not like, well, this is the stuff I tell people and this is the stuff I don't tell people. the things that you tell your parents are going to be different to the things that you tell to your friends, that might be different to the things you tell a romantic partner. And there are certain things you might say to perfect strangers, because that provides a unique kind of objectivity and security, that you wouldn't tell to people who are close to you. There's some things you're totally fine saying in private, or even to a group of people like this, but definitely wouldn't say in public if there was a camera on. And so it's not like there's private information and public information. All of us kind of create these boundaries. We use information to shape our reputations, but at the same time to erect walls and things that we don't want to share. We're seeing this a lot more in the workplace in terms of social media and your relationship with your employer, and the extent to which your employer is looking at things, making sure your values and also potential landmines or red flags. Now, these boundaries between parties, they've existed for thousands of years. What you share, what you don't share. And for the first time ever with the internet age, they're being eroded in ways with a rapidity and a certain ferocity that we haven't really experienced before. We share information and hold things back largely because we want some control over how people view us. We want control over our self-narratives. And the problem with modern big data collection is that having so much information out there is that we're losing control over this narrative before we even meet people for the first time. And so we have less control, not just of impressions, but also our first impressions. You guys date on the internet? Do you not Google people before you meet them? If you don't, now you're like a psychopath if you didn't do that. You're walking into a date and just like walking, like it's something that's seen as normal in that regard now, trying to find what information that exists out there. Even if you Google yourself all the time, do you think that you know all of the information that's out there about you? Do you have a large measure of control over that as well? You have a lot of civilizations, and I keep saying civilizations, nations, countries, especially in the West, Europe in particular, that are starting to pass legislation. It's called the right to be forgotten, where there's information about you that after a certain period of time is being squashed. We've been doing this with financial information for a really long time because we reckon, bankruptcies go away after 7-8 years, things like that. Criminal histories, depending on what's going on, you can have records sealed. It's because we recognize that people have the capacity to grow and change. There's a certain permanence that's happening here that is becoming harder to escape from, and this shapes people's impressions because social psychology teaches us that first impressions are formed super quick, are usually based on a very few pieces of information, and then become really, really hard to dislodge. Now, I know this kind of sucks, and I wish it wasn't the case, but scientifically speaking, that's just the way we do it. Because the whole hard truth of it, when it comes to forming opinions about people, myself and most of you included, we're just the worst, all of us, garbage, in terms of how it comes to actually deciding why you think someone's good and someone's bad. Just raise your hand if you drive a car. Do you make value judgments about people a lot in traffic? That guy, like that kind of, I'm not even gonna repeat it. So, come on, people. Most of us judge ourselves by our intentions, what we meant to do, and everybody else by their actions and about the information that we can find with regards to that. And so that's why information's important, because of this kind of unfortunate, but largely documented in social psychology, notion about how we form opinions. And our opinions of others have very little regard for the depths of their lives, for the capacities of individuals to grow and change, and, what Walt Whitman says, we all contain multitudes. But the sad fact is to live in a modern society is to make snap judgments and to place other people and other individuals into these nice, tight, neat little packages. Neat little packages that at the end of the day are going to be based off of small snippets of information. All of us, as we walk around in this digital age, leave little snippets about ourselves behind all the time, some of which we're aware of, some of which we're not aware of. And a lot of that has to do with our relationship with the law and our relationship with opting in versus opting out and things like that. But at the end of the day, over a long enough period of time, your snippets, okay, so you bought a food processor, who cares? Or, you bought this thing. But we're at a point now where you have 10, 15 years of data that, if collected and aggregated, do you guys you know what algorithms are? Goodness, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not here like, the machines are taking over. But there's a thing where the predictive nature of what you can do with data now will blow your minds. And if you have someone in tech, the New York Times just started something called the Privacy Project last year, which writes a lot of good articles about this. There's a really good book by Dr. O'Neill, who I think now is working for herself, called Weapons of Math Destruction, which is really popular a couple of years ago, which is a very balanced just examination of what predictive algorithms are. They never know with 100% certainty, but with like 87% certainty what you're going to do, and then things are orchestrated around that. The full spectrum of human emotion and experience is too often reduced to a small group of facts. Whether that's good or whether that's bad, that's on you. You want to push against it, that's fine. But privacy is the thing that protects you in this regard. And asserting a strong privacy rights and privacy protections is how you regain some control over this narrative. Not just as an individual right, but as a societal right, and of course as a legal right. Now, like I said, this thing about protecting and sharing information at will, this works both ways. People also share information with us as we share with them, and so it's not like you get complete control. That's an unrealistic viewpoint. People are going to form the opinions they form about you, but you deserve a measure of control, maybe the largest measure of control, and that very recently, by which I mean 1 to 1.5 generations, has eroded with considerable rapidity to a point where we should all be alarmed. And there are other nations that have passed laws that have found ways to help people regain control over that. Now, this brings us to the second thing that I really like about privacy, is privacy creates space for intimacy. Think about how your strong personal relationships are formed. People share confidences, they share complex emotional experiences with each other as a kind of currency, as a way to kind of nurture trust and communicate with each other. Let's keep it simple. Just imagine you're on a first date and it's going super well, like star-crossed lovers well. Or if you're lucky enough to be in love with your partner, remember what it was like earlier on when you guys were meeting and you guys were getting together. Now, think about how that first date went. You're there, you're kind of talking, and then if you want to communicate that you're into it and that you're into that person, you kind of share something about yourself that you maybe wouldn't tell other people, right? An emotional experience, something that's out there. And then if they like you, they might share something private back. Private information, intimate relationships about yourself is a form of currency that we give each other. And so if you lose that privacy and all of those things about you are out there, you don't have this currency that you can then give to indicate to people, to friends, and especially to romantic partners, that you're into them and that you feel like you want to build trust and that they want to build trust with you as well. As our privacy diminishes, the value of that currency diminishes as well. This is the kind of intimacy we enjoyed beforehand, and this is something that we're losing. If you felt like your text messages were going to be subjected to being viewed, or your emails were going to be subjected, would you have a certain chilling effect? Would you be less intimate with the people that you were with if you knew that people were watching? I mean, most of us would be. So that's important to recognize. Another thing, of course, is privacy is important to mental health. It's an essential aspect of mental health, actually. Again, this isn't my opinion. In leaning on well-established psychological research, particularly something that's called the Hawthorne effect, if you've ever seen it, the extent to which, anyone here ever take psychology in college? I didn't. I'm up here talking like I did, but I just read a lot of the books. But you have a problem if you're running experiments on human beings and you're a scientist, because you never really know if the data you're getting is real, because the human beings know that they're being watched. You could always run an experiment and not tell them you're being watched, except then you get fired, because it's incredibly unethical to run experiments on people and not tell them that you're running experiments. And so this is a conundrum, and it's called the Hawthorne effect. It's a paradox. If you're running experiments and people know that they're being watched, they will alter their behaviors. So what psychologists do is they kind of trick people, but like ethically trick people. They're like, you're going to be part of this study, and the study's about this, but it's like really about this. And so you can kind of find a way to check people as they move forward. But the fact is, if you know you're being watched, that is an incredibly stressful situation. That's what Orwell's talking about in 1984. And also, do you guys read 1984? Just raise your hand. After the 2016 election, sales went like through the roof. Whoever's agent was covering the Orwell estate just made like a bunch of money. And so when the main character, Winston, goes and finally falls in love with this girl, they have to find a private room for themselves. It's the only way that they can be intimate and he can actually express sexual desire. Without privacy, there is no intimacy in that regard, and also mental health. Now, individuals absolutely need to carve out tiny pockets of isolation for emotional release, for self-reflection, and a sort of mental recharging. Everyone in this room knows what it is to carry the weight of the day. We each have our own burdens. We each juggle multiple versions of ourselves, and our interactions shift among coworkers, strangers, acquaintances, friends, loved ones. We wear different masks as we go through the day. Sometimes intentionally, often subconsciously, but unless you're super self-actualized, like meditating for an hour on top of a mountain every day, self-actualized, you're probably doing this, whether you recognize it or don't. You're gonna tighten in certain settings, you're gonna diminish in certain settings, and we all do it. I don't know if any of you are into poetry, but this is what T.S. Eliot is talking about in a love song for Proof Rock. From the yellow smoke that slides across the street, there must be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. This notion of kind of having a way to shift between masks. Social interaction, even in the best circumstances. I mean, I'm having a good time right now, but this is super mentally taxing. And I'm gonna go try to, after this, give myself 2 minutes. And if I did that, you guys came up to me, you're like, hey, that was horrible. And I'd just be like, can you please just give me 2 minutes? Like, I need to relax. So taxing that actually a lot of people suffer from legit clinical social anxiety disorders. That being around people and being watched and interacting with people causes a level of distress that isn't just psychological, but then manifests in physical areas and can be incredibly debilitating. Social interactions are exhausting. The true significance of those interactions only only come to light after we set aside our social masks in solitude and reflect on them in private. Speaking of Eliot, that would bring us to our next point, which would be privacy fosters creativity. Just show of hands, anyone here identify even as an amateur sort of artist? Do you write a little? Do you paint a little? Do you do something that's kind of like a form of self-expression? Chris, what do you do? Do you write a little? That's nice. I'm sure it's wonderful. What artists call the finished work is most often the product of numerous drafts and revisions, of great purges, frustrations, new directions forged. Most of us aren't Mozart, and frankly, if you slap together your work in a day without going through revisions, you may think it's great, but it's probably shit. It's one of the reasons that you have workshops for writing. It's why people go to art school. It's why people take like MFA workshops. It's so that you can be in a certain area critiqued by people who know what they're doing. Tear this apart, bring this back together, and the thing you get at the end of that whole draft and revision process kind of glows, and it's better than what you thought it could be. Privacy is very useful for this grind. Art is a grind, if you talk to people who do it for a living. It's about digging in on days you don't want to and doing that. But privacy in artistic creation allows works in progress to develop in ways that would be impossible if the creative process was just wide open for everybody to see. Constant observation is going to blunt even the sharpest of edges. A lack of privacy in this regard creates what a lot of scholars call a chilling effect, particularly for artists as they're creating things. It also prevents you from being as expressive as you might be. Even just like all of us. Everyone's been driving alone in the car on the highway going 60 and then like rocking out to your favorite song, right? Singing at the top of your lungs. Do you do that at a red light? When someone's like next to you and able to look at you and think, you're like, let me lower this down a little bit, right? And then like back when you're speeding and you're in movement, we'll go back and be more self-expressive. So again, dancing around your apartment, something like that, things that you wouldn't do when you were there. So if you want to create, privacy is an essential tool in the creative process. It doesn't mean entire privacy, but even selecting the people that you want around you, who you'll bring into the fold to offer criticisms for your revisions, and then finally display to the general public what your creative voice was, what the thing you were trying to do. And finally, perhaps most appropriately to the present moment, privacy is essential to the democratic process. It just is. As a student of democratic systems, creativity, mental health, control over yourself, narrative, all those things are super important. They also have to do with individuals, individual rights. Privacy is also a societal value. You can forget about yourself and your own individualism and just realize that if we don't have privacy protections built in, the democratic system isn't going to work. It has to be at the forefront of any nation that boasts to the rest of the world that it's a free country and that the people who live in it are actual free. So how? First off, it's because privacy creates space for the kinds of radical discussions that will eventually push against the status quo. A ton of people don't know this, but when the Founding Fathers write the Constitution, which the anniversary was a couple of weeks ago, they're in Philly, Independence Hall. It's July, it's super hot, but they did 4 things on day one. The first thing they did, they were like, all right, who's running this thing? And then George Washington's in the corner, and they're like, obviously George Washington's gonna be in charge. The conquering hero who won the thing. So first thing, first vote, everyone's cool with that? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. Right after that first thing was done, the next thing was a guy named George Wythe stood up and he had a proposal for the entire the independence Founding Fathers framers to vote on. And what he says is we should do 3 things. First off, we should close the doors of this meeting to the public and post guards. Second, we should all take a vow of secrecy that we're not going to discuss any of the things that we talk about when we're over here. And third, one person's going to take notes and those notes aren't going to be published for 50 years. Now, the Founding Fathers aren't assholes, they're not tyrants. The first thing they do as soon as they finish the document is send it back to the states, and it's called the ratification debates for like a year and a half. Federalists, anti-federalists, everybody's dissecting that document, poring over it. They're very open about what they created. But the process required to produce the document, the compromises forged in the room, some of which are horrendous, particularly with regards to power structures around race, slavery, women's rights, and things like that. Some of them quite wonderful, the way that we came up with finding a way to balance representation and things like that. Great compromises, horrific compromises that set us on a collision course for civil war. But at the same time, these guys are all politicians. They go back home and they're shot callers in their respective states. They know that they're working together, but at any point in time, someone's gonna maybe try to run for the office that they're running. Any point in time you're there, you might say something that's unpopular. If they felt like their colleagues might immediately the next day run to the press and say, well, I don't know what this guy's saying, but you should all be informed of that, it's gonna mean people aren't gonna be free to express themselves. They're not gonna spitball ideas that might not work. They're not gonna feel like they can actually voice what they think should change. Instead, anyone else will just kind of fall in line to express sentiments that others hadn't liked. Privacy is necessary for democracy to function. Think about when you vote. Can anybody find out who you voted for? Absolutely not. we have a lot of really good laws against that we take super seriously. It's hard and almost impossible since the early, I guess, progressive era to find out who voted for who. You can go into a district and find out how many people voted Democrat or Republican, how many people voted for this candidate or that candidate. But when it comes down to knowing who voted for who, that stuff is against a body of law that if you get caught with your hands in the cookie jar is going to be a huge, huge problem. Why, do you think? Anyone? Why do we vote in private? Shouldn't you stand tall? It's democracy. This is who I support. This is why I support him or her. Yeah.
Voting privacy is also another way of utilizing your First Amendment rights.
Okay, so you're saying like you're more willing to vote your conscience?
Yeah.
Do you guys ever, in like elementary school, take votes where everyone had to put their head down? Do you think those are more or less honest? Not that far from this building, there was an old political machine in New York called Tammany Hall, which when it comes down to just graft and corruption and political intimidation was like, mwah, right? Like as good as it gets as far as the American experience. Going in, writing down, seeing who voted for who. If you wanted to try to break that corruption and vote for somebody who was against it, if everybody knew how you were voting, you probably wouldn't do it. You'd be less likely, because if your guy lost and the machine still stayed around, the retribution could be severe, whether it's just losing your business and being kicked out of your house to actual violence and intimidation. The Australian ballot, which is what it was called, was essentially a way of voting in private, which we still have today, which means people should go it. Do you know this is an idea that's being floated for the impeachment inquiry, right? It's never going to happen. But I don't know if you've seen, there are a number of people who have been on the news lately and have said, if actually everyone in the Senate was allowed to vote in private and not have their votes like assigned to themselves, that you'd probably see a very, very different outpouring of what you'd see when you're there. Now that's both problematic and good. I mean, it depends really on, you could argue it both ways. But my point is that we do tie in voting rights and the privacy of the ballot as something that provides a more accurate reflection of the people's will, of the power that flows from the people and gives us our leaders. Again, this isn't just about individuals, it's about groups as well. Groups that push against the powers that be to fight for their own vision of equality. Our laws have really strong protections also for what's called organizational privacy. One thing I talk a lot about in the book is how without privacy, you wouldn't be able to get things like the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, the women's movement, because before you go out and protest on the streets, you have to have planning and strategy sessions. You have to talk about what's your plan going to be? How are you going to bring together these coalitions? What are you going to do? If you ever study the history of the FBI or J. Edgar Hoover, there's a reason that the feds were trying as hard as they could to spy on all of these movements, particularly the civil rights movement, is so that they could find and identify weaknesses in the planning stage before moving forward. There's a really famous case, NAACP versus Alabama. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but essentially in the 50s, after the Montgomery bus boycott victory, the early movement's picking up steam. The NAACP opens up a chapter in Alabama, and the first thing the Attorney General of Alabama does is he says, I need to see all your membership lists, and I need to see the people who are giving you money. And they're just like, absolutely not, right? Like, this is the Jim Crow South. Do you think a lot of white people are helping the movement? They are. It's not this idea that the entire thing was monolithic. There are a lot of white people who cared about civil rights in the South, but wouldn't say so publicly for fear of retribution, whether socially, economically, or something like that. And so being able to, and then it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was 9-0. And it actually turns out that you create a new constitutional right from this out of the First Amendment. It's called freedom of association. Not just that you have the right to associate, because association is speech. Association is speech, therefore speech is protected by the Constitution, therefore it exists in the First Amendment. That's the logic. But it's not just association. The case, it's a landmark case, talks about the privacy of people's associations, that you have the right to join secret organizations because we believe in a free society that's healthy, that it creates groups that have strength to push against the status quo, express ideas that people find problematic, and then create the change that a lot of us think were really great and end up working out for them. Now, of course, this can cut both ways. This kind of privacy being extended to hate groups could also be problematic, but it's regarded by the court as a price that we pay to have this ability. There have been dozens of legal cases that affirm these rights of social activist groups to organize in privacy and to work out strategies. Because again, before you can create something, a group does need privacy to hammer out its eventual missteps and prevent these things from happening. So again, privacy is not just about individual rights, it's about a larger societal right. Our inabilities as Americans to make this distinction is one of the reasons that we have the weakest system of privacy protections of all the advanced democracies. And I'm saying that as a law professor. We have the weakest system of laws of all the advanced democracies, and they're also the most complicated. Europe, over the last couple of years, just passed a series of regulations called the GDPR. Now, American companies deal with European citizens all the time. Amazon sells European goods and stuff like that. American companies right now spend considerable more time and energy protecting the privacy rights of non-Americans than they do American citizens. There's a completely different set of rules that apply when you order something on Amazon as opposed to when someone in London or someone in Madrid or something like that orders off Amazon. What information be collected, how it's stored, and things like that. And so it's important to recognize too, and our mistake, and I think a mistake a lot of people make, is just talking about privacy as an individual right. And that's a problem, because the things that push against privacy are usually good for the rest of society. Again, the goal here is balance. Privacy is important, but so are the things that push against it. National security is super important. Free media is super important. Corporate efficiency creates jobs. That's this wonderful aspect and can create, a level of economic maturity, technological innovation that no civilizations have ever seen, can make us the envy of the tech world. Go to Silicon Valley, the things that we produce. A lot of that are wonderful, but they push against privacy, and so what you need is a workable balance. My point here, and a lot of what I argue, is that we don't have that balance here. The forces that push against privacy have way too much, I guess, just latitude in terms of how they can do that, and we don't have adequate systems that have effectively pushed against and created a kind of harmony and balance that a lot of other people are trying to do. So let's go back to the beginning. If you're not doing anything wrong, I come up to your phone, I come up to you, ask for your phone, ask for your house keys, FBI badge. I'm not gonna steal your money, I'm not gonna steal your bank account. You still resist, I tell you to stop being obsessed. You're that poor kid in the first day of class. How do we use what we just learned and give it back in clear language? Now, a good place to start would be by pointing out this. This is based off of a logical fallacy. Not all secrets are nefarious. This, if you look at it closely, implies that if you're hiding something, you're doing something wrong, that secrets equal bad. And that's not true. Not all secrets are bad. Again, secrets provide space for intimacy. They foster creativity. They're conducive to mental health. They're a big part of our democratic process and allow us to free. Do you hate the founding fathers? Because that's essentially what you're saying when you're saying if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. That'll play on TV, really. Or when a congressman's kind of pushing against you or something like that on kind of areas. Most importantly, they give me control, as you pointed out, over my self-narrative. In a time when that self-narrative is something I don't really have as much control as my parents and their parents and their parents had when they were navigating New York and navigating their professional lives and their social lives and their romantic lives. So the proper response, I guess, to this is simply, I'm not doing anything wrong and I have plenty to hide, for the reasons that I kind of just outlined. But if that's too complicated, you could just tell them that it's none of their damn business. It's not the most eloquent rejoinder, but it's punchy, and it sells books, hopefully. I don't think the book came out like 2 days ago, and on Amazon, it's not downstairs. I don't think they've even shipped the books to New York yet. It's gonna take some time. But if you're interested in this stuff, I teach entire courses on this. It's my first book. It's a thrill to be able to talk about it here. When I was a teenager, I worshiped this place, and so it's kind of a big night. And the talks like this are short. The kind of stuff I cover is usually over a whole semester. So I cut this a little short because I wanted to just see if anyone had any questions. Because if you have anything that you feel I didn't address that was important to you with regards to privacy, please, now's the time. I'm happy to talk about it and hoping that we can have a discussion. Yeah.
This is topical, but whistleblower laws, that's something that knowing they have the privacy will keep the government in check.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, that's essentially the entire model behind. Oh, yeah, he was saying with regards to whistleblower laws, and that I didn't really speak about that, which are obviously in the news a lot. The extent to which, if you're calling out someone in terms of illegal activity, not just in the government, but even in the private sector, that what are those protections like and how do they work, or what I think about them. So that's really the entire model behind WikiLeaks. Essentially, if you look at WikiLeaks' mission statement, what Assange was saying earlier on was essentially people want to speak up about the corruption they see all the time, and that in any organization that's nefarious, there are people who care and genuinely have a sense of civic responsibility, of a larger sense of humanitarianism, and the thing that prevents them from speaking up is a fear of retribution. And so if you can create a circumstance or a body of laws, or in his case, a digital structure that ensures people's privacy, what you'll see is a lot more of moves in positive directions, a lot more evidence being brought out and stuff like that. And so that's what we're talking about now with regards to the whistleblower privacy. And that pushes up against what is also, privacy is important for government. Governments need privacy to function. You need to be able to voice popular opinions. Too much privacy also fosters tyranny and the ability for people to cover it up. And whistleblower laws are, I think, a perfect kind of meta irony, because you're giving someone privacy to expose the private affairs of others, which we've seen has worked really well. If you look at a lot of WikiLeaks is super controversial, particularly from about 2014 forward, or even before that with their idea of declassified information with the Iraq War. There's a ton of people in the intelligence community who argue pretty convincingly that their assets were burned, that we had people that were helping us for a long time that weren't American citizens who completely got hung out to dry because of those things. So it's definitely not cut and dry, but it's also done a lot of good. It's brought down super corrupt organizations and exposed crimes against humanity that wouldn't have been exposed out there. And so I think that ties into the democratic thing I was talking about before, that privacy shouldn't always be seen as something that bad people do and lurk in the shadows, that it also can be the only way to get good people to speak up, who have families and who have careers and who have things that they don't want to lose. Yeah.
So you talked about the fear of retribution, and maybe even the fear of judgment is kind of prevalent in a lot of the themes you were talking about. Do you think an alternate or maybe even complementary strategy to privacy is to just help society be more open and open-minded and considerate, and help individuals be more, I guess, resistant to judgment?
Thank you so much for saying that. If I was hoping someone would bring it up, but if they didn't, I was going to force it later. This is something that people have talked about for a long time, even before the digital renaissance. You see it in a lot of different areas, utopian communities, particularly the kibbutzim. Anyone know what it is to be in a kibbutz, like out of like Israel, which has very, very, very diminished standards of privacy in the community. And there's a belief that actually, if you abolish privacy, it'll force people to just be honest and open and really shine the light of the sun on it to disinfect in that kind of regard. And I think that first off is a very respectable notion that a lot of people adhere to and should be free to kind of should have the freedom to go out and live that kind of life if that's what they want. It's not something that I would see as ideal. And so let me say a couple of things. First off, there are always going to be people who don't really care that much about their privacy. And if you don't, there's nothing wrong with you. But you have to realize that a lot of people, if not most people, do care about it. And so having the ability to give those people the rights and protections that they want to, again, control their self-narratives. There's something I didn't talk about, too, that has to do with information's power. And then you have the potential for something called asymmetrical knowledge. And that's a big problem as well, that most people in Silicon Valley who come up with privacy solutions. California is really ahead of this issue. Their privacy laws are very, very strict. Most American privacy law lives at the state level. And so all of this information being out there about you, you don't know how it is, how much of it is, how it's being used. It creates a power imbalance where the powers that be know significantly more about you than you do know about them. And so I think both of those things will exist at the same time. Having a more free and open society, we've seen on social media, can be very helpful for us. Not to just identify who's bad, but also to encourage honesty and stuff like that. But this thing with asymmetrical knowledge is also, so you're seeing almost like a double helix, like these twin pressures, a dialectic, as Marx would say, kind of pushing against each other at the same time. And to pay attention to that struggle as it moves forward in time is, I think, a lot of what privacy scholars do. But you're absolutely right. There are instances where having less privacy can create a more harmonious society, one in which particular values can be enforced and changed and challenged in ways that don't require going 10 rounds and, having people, not really say what they want. And so, yeah, those things are important to recognize as well. Yeah.
In the beginning of your talk,
Thanks. In the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that you saw changes in privacy being foundational, epochal, essentially, significant shifts in our cultural identity, maybe generationally. And we've seen the rise of compromat political culture now, where starting with the absurd P-tape, but even something like the announcement of an investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails affecting the outcome of an election, or a president asking Ukraine to gin up potential information on a candidate. Simply by announcing the investigation, not any findings, one can create the effect. So if privacy and maintaining private information is so important, how can you defeat compromat culture that need only make a false insinuation to erode that very same capital you describe as being so intrinsic to privacy? How can we protect against the need to prove something false and yet retain our privacy?
Sure. You said a number of things. One would be, this isn't a liberal or conservative thing or a Fox News and MSNBC thing. It's a plague on both of their houses. I mean, the extent to which sensationalist 24-hour news cycle journalism has found a way to really market outrage and encourage people to feel outraged by everything. I'm not saying there aren't things that you shouldn't be outraged about, but there seems to be a clear strategy that is moving in that way, and that's what gives the accusation, I think, its power. But to a certain extent, these things have always had power. I think if you even study 100 years ago, the scoop of tabloid media, these accusations always bring things out. It's just now they can be amplified in ways. So I guess I'd explore first off what's really new and what's not, because what might just be new is the amplification with which these things have, and so the consequences are that much more dire. But people might have just been super flippant with accusations kind of always, right? I mean, McCarthyism, for example.
Perhaps we're in a culture where we're contributing that information in our social media spheres and assuming it will remain private. Or we're engaging in that conversation and hoping that that layer doesn't become breached in some way.
Right. So one thing I really like about being a professor is that I do feel like I get to talk a lot with, college freshmen were born in 2002, right? Or 2001 right now. It's insane. Because at the end of their emails, when they all give me the email class, it's like, A. Smith, 02. And I'm like, but the thing is, they're called the guinea pig generation for a reason, because they're the first that didn't see the bridge between analog and digital. They spent the entirety of their lives in the digital. They care a lot about privacy. They really do. And social media, I would say, is not for Generation Z, and I can't speak for all of them, is not a particularly accurate representation of their lives. And that's one of the things that a lot of modern social psychologists talk about in terms of, particularly in counseling services and dealing with students that suffer from severe anxiety and pressures, and college suicide rates are through the roof compared to like previous generations, is because that the life you're presenting on social media is curated and not accurate, but for some reason it's hard for young adults to realize that everyone else is doing the exact same thing, that like you're the only one who's lying, right, and they're not, which is understandable. I mean, like your brains aren't even fully developed by the time you're, what is it, like 24, 25? And some of us also forget how hard it was, I think, to be a kid and those kind of pressures. But I will say Gen Z cares a lot about their privacy. They understand they have significantly less of it than their parents and grandparents did. And there's going to be an adjustment period. And they're called the guinea pig generation, I think, for that reason. That it's my hope, but also prediction, that the next one will have a much more honed and, I think, workable solution if we can find adequate laws to give them the kind of protections that they want. But the ones right now, I mean, nobody understands like what's happening. I mean, did you see the Facebook hearings when they were like, Mrs. Zuckerberg, if you're not charging your clients, I gotta ask, how are you making money? And he's like, we run ads, Senator, right? Like when it was the level of which there's a generational gap. There's always been generational gaps. Ours are, I think, much more significantly pronounced than others before. That was kind of a deflect. If I had the answer to your question, I'd be like running Brookings right now. Yeah.
You talked a lot about commonalities, through lines about our conceptions of privacy, both throughout our history and also with other species. I was wondering if you've learned anything about how our notions of privacy have changed throughout societal history. I guess you can define that however you want, but I'm just kind of interested in, like, to what degree our notions of privacy are flexible rather than kind of constant.
Sure, thank you. That's basically 100% of what my book is about. And thanks, I don't know. So different civilizations, first off, have different ways of perceiving of privacy. One thing that makes the particularly American way of looking at privacy is we almost always frame it as an individual right. We've been talking about privacy for about 130 years. Brandeis writes his article in response to the first instant camera. So cameras have been around since the 1840s, but you had to kind of stand there for a while for them to work. That's why everyone looks like they're super serious. And so in the 1890s, Kodak comes out with the instant camera. So it's the first time someone can be photographed without their permission. And this is what he's writing his Harvard Law Review about. But when you talk about it, it's always this individual right. And this makes sense. Individualism has a lot to do with our national culture, and we are maybe the most of the individualistic nations in terms of Western society. Our great literature really centers on that a lot, whereas other nations tend to frame it as a societal right. Germany, I think, is the perfect foil to it because they understood and experienced the evils of both fascism and communism in one lifetime, and were very in tune with how information can be used to create a kind of crush of an oppressive society, which is why now modern Germany is by far has the most advanced privacy laws and are all about protecting people's usage. It's because they've seen the larger, bigger picture aspects. We haven't had to experience that. To answer your question accurately, I'd say once you hit 1890, privacy has to be put in its proper context. So it's not just how has privacy changed, but in what context. What I write about is 5 different contexts. I trace one just in photojournalism and the way the media has changed. And in that way, our conceptions of privacy had a lot more to do with media is much more pushy about people's personal lives. That's changed since the 1890s. Who was up for grabs as being up for grabs as a story, as a target of a story, and then who isn't, just grows and grows and grows and grows as American media moves forward into the 20th century. And the argument that the media has always used for that was, hey man, we're just giving the people what we want. If you guys have a problem with this, you should really like request better journalism, because at the end of the day, we're just here to give you what you need. If you feel like your privacy is being eroded, stop buying these papers, but all of our numbers suggest that you really do care. Everyone usually doesn't have a problem with other people's privacy being invaded until it's their own. With national security, what you see is one long train of evidence. I talk a lot about McCarthyism, but even then, I mean, the 20th century is one long history of national security privacy abuses. You have World War I with the anti-German campaigns that are happening, and the Sedition Acts and the Espionage Acts. Just move right into the 20s with the Red Scare and like A. Mitchell Palmer. That's when a very bright young J. Edgar Hoover is cutting his teeth and learning how information could be used as power. McCarthy hearings actually start in the 30s. It's just not McCarthy. HUAC's born then. Move right into Japanese internment during World War II, and then right into the 50s with the Red Scare, and then right into FBI in the 60s looking at the civil rights movement, you know, and then Hillary's emails, right? Like, so there's not really that. But Snowden, I guess, would be a good example. So that has been a slow, steady pressure that, despite our outrage, doesn't really seem to change at all. The reproductive rights is another thing that I focus a lot on, which has changed considerably, particularly with changing opinions about the medical community and how they view these things. At first, the medical community was really, I don't want to say, the medical community was about outlawing abortions largely because you had midwives performing them in the early 19th century who weren't particularly qualified, and there were doctors being like, you shouldn't be doing these procedures. Then that all shifts in the 50s when they realize it's a public health crisis. And so a lot of the constitutional right to privacy is built around reproductive rights. Big data is something that's only ever really moved in one direction. Let me just like laying it all out there. Look, if I can leave you with anything, let me leave you with this. Information moves through 3 different stages if you study information sciences. Information is collected, and how it's collected, that presents its own privacy problems. Then once it's collected, it's processed and aggregated and moved around different systems, and that presents its own problems. Then it's sent out and disseminated, and that presents its own problems. So if you want to fix privacy problems, you have to realize first that there are different problems at different stages. That first stage, information collection, we've lost it. We're done. We're way too far gone. This is my opinion, but you're not going to stop that tide. You're like one of those people who is like in a workshop pushing against the Industrial Revolution. You'd be like, I think this factory thing's going to blow over. Like, it's not. Like, it's you know, you're absolutely not going to stop the collection of it. So let's go to the next stage, how it's processed, what people do with it. That's an area that we can still make a lot of changes on through legislation, through laws, and also through citizens just making basic steps. A VPN costs about $100 a year, a virtual private network, which basically just prevents Verizon or whoever has your internet company from logging your browser history and then selling it and giving it to people who want it. That's a very quick, inexpensive privacy fix. Privacy has always been on the other end of the economic win. There's a lot of money to be made collecting data, and there was never that much money made protecting privacy. What's really cool is that seems to have changed now in the 21st century. I'm not really an idealist. I'm much more of a cynic. I think if you want to change things, our leaders, right? But if you can give me a profit motive, I trust people's greed and that kind of notion. Cybersecurity is $1 billion industry. Facebook just got hit with how much in terms of that? You know how many like privacy lawyers are popping out of law school and people tackling them to give them jobs in like all these different places. It's a body of law that's growing severely. Companies bring in privacy people. So from those little 50-cent screens that you put on your laptop webcam to a $100 VPN subscription to something like LifeLock or, you know, an identity theft protection monitoring system, there's a whole market now for what's called privacy enhancing technologies that are really exciting. You guys been to Penn Station? You see Apple's billboard? We care about, the whole thing is we care about your privacy. We created encrypted software. Facebook's pushing right back against the Justice Department right now because they're saying what they want access to WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is what's called end-to-end encryption. And Facebook's saying no. You think why? Because Facebook cares so much about your privacy? Like, it doesn't. Like, that's been proven. It's because there's more money to be made protecting it. So put your dollar in the privacy area. Don't go crazy. Don't be a conspiracy theory. Don't dig a bunker or anything like that. But there are a ton of companies that are selling privacy enhancements, and you should look into who's doing the right thing and who's doing not, and put your money to kind of help that, because that's, I think, what helps get laws changed, and that's what I think helps actually protect the things that are there. So I'm going to hang out with my friends because I haven't been here in a little bit. Thank you so much for coming, honestly. You think like no one's ever going to come to this thing.